Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am so excited to have this guy back on the show. He's Conrad Weaver. He's an award-winning producer and president and owner of Conjo Studios, LLC, and he made the blockbuster PTSD 911 documentary that, and I told you, Conrad, before, I've showed it to a couple people in my
Mhm.
sphere, and they love it, brother. So
Yeah. Well, thank you.
welcome back. I'm you were on, I think, about a year ago,
Yeah.
or maybe it was before. I think
I think it
maybe
was before the film came
yeah,
out, I
before the
believe.
film
Yeah.
came
Hmm.
out, and buddy, it's amazing. It is.
Yeah.
I watched it the other night, and it almost brings me to tears. So,
Thank you.
how
Thank you
did
for,
you? Oh, absolutely. Go
yeah.
ahead.
hmm Yeah. It's been an honor to work on this. And yeah, thanks for the accolades and for the support.
How did you? What's your background, Conrad? Since and again, I gave a little a little
Yeah.
bio of you, but
Yeah.
how did you get into this, and how did you fall into film?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have a degree in psychology. Go figure. But it took a windy path from many years ago, graduating from my undergraduate,
Yeah.
and one thing led to another. I ended up starting to work in the area of film production, doing corporate work, doing commercials, doing some event stuff. I kind of tried to stay away from weddings, that kind of thing. But I had some fun times with some corporate events. I did some work for Greg Maddux, the baseball legend,
Yeah. Yeah.
and got to hang out with him and his buddies and do some work with them. And then in 2010, I started working on a documentary film that was actually my wife's idea. So full credit to her.
And you got a lot of documentaries out there.
I do. So
PTSD
that
911 is just one of them.
Yeah, that first one was called The Great American Wheat Harvest, and it was a story about these farmers who have all of these combines and tractors and equipment and RVs, and they go down to Texas and they harvest grain for farmers, and they travel across the country to do that. And we produced a documentary. It won an Emmy Award, and so that was fun. It was like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
And so that kind of launched my documentary film career. And one thing led to another. I had another film that was kind of in the agriculture world about the drought in the American West, and all those films took me away from home for many months, well, not months, weeks at a time. And so I was looking for something closer home, and the opioid crisis reared its ugly head in our
Yeah.
community, and specifically with a woman in our community, her son got wrapped up in this, and so we produced a documentary called Heroin's Grip. And as a part of that, I was invited to do ride-alongs with law enforcement, the sheriff's
Mhm.
department, with the drug interdiction team, and I also spent some time with fire and EMS and riding with them. And it was on one of those days when I was riding with a police officer, and the call came in that there was an overdose. And so lights and sirens off to the scene, and it was a fatal overdose, and something that the first responders on scene, they were like, it's just Tuesday, just a
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
just a normal
Just a
day.
normal day.
For me, I was like, holy crap, what did I just see here,
Yeah.
and experience, and the chaos in the house and all the stuff that it goes around a fatality like that, tragic experience. But so that got me thinking, how did these things affect first responders?
Mhm.
And I started researching this, and then I came back to the officer I was with that day, and I said, "Hey, do you guys do you guys suffer from PTSD? Because you see all this stuff." And she says, "Oh my goodness, if you would only know the half of it."
Yeah.
And then she said, "If you want to make a documentary about that, I'll do anything I can to help you." What she didn't realize, and what I didn't realize, that she'd become one of the main characters in the film
Mhm.
that is now PTSD 911.
Mhm.
And so for the next 3.5 years, I spent time traveling across the country, collecting stories and learning about this issue with the first responders. And we produced a film.
Yeah.
And, it's been an amazing journey to connect with first responders, to hang out with firefighters and police officers and dispatchers and all the people who take care of our communities. And I've learned to respect their work tremendously because they put their lives on the line every single day. Here locally, I live in Emmitsburg, Maryland, the home of the National Fire Academy, and so fire is a big thing here. The fire training is a big thing
Sure.
here,
Yeah.
and we have an all-volunteer fire department. here locally, the siren goes off, and my kids make fun of me because now I've turned into my grandmother because she always had the scanner on.
Got to see what's going on
And now I
today.
have a scanner in the pocket. And so I turned the scanner on. What's going on in the community? And I respect them because, at 2:30 in the morning when I'm sound asleep in my bed, and it's 20 below zero outside, they're going on a call.
Yeah.
They're jumping out of bed, for our local fire department, racing down the street to the fire hall, jumping on a rig and going out and taking care of someone's problem. And it's like, wow, that takes some dedication. It takes some commitment. It
Yeah.
takes, a lot of things, a sacrifice for sure.
Yeah. And I like what you said. Thank you for explaining that, Conrad. And, I mean, what you said really stood out to me, especially when we kind of joked about, but it's the truth, it's only Tuesday,
Yeah.
and that's, kind of a way, as you probably know, that's a way to kind of put things down there, put our emotions down
Right.
there.
Sure.
To try to mitigate it. But
Mhm.
and this with psychology, with your background in psychology. I mean, there's only so much of that you can, and I speak from experience, 23
Mhm.
years as a cop. There's only so much of that you can see without it
Yeah.
affecting you
Sure.
later on down the road, and maybe sooner rather than later, whether it's drinking, whether it's
Yeah.
PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation, all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And, I have to say, all first responders, but especially cops, you guys see the darker side of humanity
yeah,
every stinking day.
yeah,
And you can't be, if I just eat pizza every day, pretty soon my body's going to tell me that I've been eating pizza every day, right? And so if I soak in the darkness of humanity every single day, pretty soon my body's going to tell me what I've
absolutely,
been soaking in.
absolutely. And I, without giving away the documentary, because I want people who haven't seen it to see it. Um, it talks a little bit or a lot about how people these brave men and women get in there to try to make a difference,
Yeah,
and they do, but not without suffering themselves in the process,
sure.
and that's the human element that I think that people forget sometimes when they're looking at first responders, is that, oh, that's what they signed up for. No, I didn't sign up for this.
Right,
I didn't
right.
sign up. I got, to serve my community, but I didn't sign up to see trauma after trauma after trauma
Hmm.
after, every day.
Well, you didn't sign up to have that affect you the way it does,
Absolutely.
right?
And there's only so, I mean, there's only so much that a human, can see
Yeah.
before it starts affecting you. I mean, first responders, not just police, and this, Conrad, but fire dispatchers
Mm.
are
Yeah,
often overlooked,
yeah. They
but
hear it.
they hear it. They're not,
Hmm.
and the bad thing about dispatchers, or maybe that's phrased wrong, but they get no closure
Right.
a lot of
Yeah.
times, because you
They
and I
hear
are
it,
on the,
they
yeah,
imagine it in their brain, and our brains are really creative, and we create scenes that don't really exist sometimes.
absolutely.
And now you don't get, like you said, you don't get closure.
No, it's not like I'm calling up dispatch at the, when we wrap up a call and say, oh, by the way, this is what happened. It's on to the
Yeah.
next call.
Right.
And I really feel sorry for dispatchers in a lot of states. And you probably have heard this, Conrad. A lot of states are starting to recognize, I
Yes.
know, as dispatchers, as first
First
responders,
responders. Yeah. And
because,
there's a national push on that as well.
yeah.
And in fact, there's a bill that's been languishing on Capitol Hill, uh, put out by Congresswoman Torres from
Mhm.
California, who wants to, it's called the 911 Saves Act, and they want to designate, all 911 dispatchers, call takers as first responders. And I think that needs to happen. And I've been helping, I've met with her staff, I met with the co-sponsor staff of that bill, and we've really been working and lobbying to have that happen. If we can just get it to committee and for it to then move
Absolutely.
on. So,
When you were putting the research together for this documentary, Conrad, I mean, the people, the first responders, I know you spoke to a ton of them. Did they ever say, "Look, I'm suffering from PTSD"? I know that a lot of them did, if not all of them. But
mhm.
did they say they were seeking treatment? Did you ever ask that? You're going to get help for that, or what?
Yeah, so the stories that we tell, the first responders that we met with, just about every one of them was involved in some kind of treatment care. uh, I felt that that's an important part of the story to make it okay for first responders to say, hey, I have a problem.
Hmm.
I need to go get help. And so I wanted to see that if Maddie in California, this tatted up firefighter, been on the job, done all the things that a firefighter does, if he can say, hey, I got a problem, I've had a suicide attempt, I'm going to go get help, then maybe, Susie over here in
Sure.
Timbuktu can say, hey, you know what? If Maddie can do it, I can do it too. And that's
Absolutely.
what we wanted to show.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest, I mean, the stigma is still there. I mean, when you say the words mental health or PTSD,
Mm.
there's still a stigma,
Yeah.
behind it, but I think it's getting better. It sure as hell has gotten better, when I first became a cop years ago.
I've even seen it in the 5 years that I've been working in this space. I've seen the conversation change. In fact, even locally here, that conversation is starting to happen. Dialogue within police departments, fire departments for sure. That hasn't that 5 years ago would never have happened.
Yeah.
And so
And,
those conversations are starting to happen.
and what I am starting to learn more and more being on a clinical team now is Conrad is that rarely is it just somebody suffering from PTSD. There's
Hmm.
comorbidity factors where there's PTSD and now there's depression or alcohol or some sort of
Sure.
addiction. I mean, usually PTSD, there's something along that goes with it, and a
Yeah.
lot of times it's substance
Hmm.
or alcohol or drugs or both,
Hmm.
to try to mitigate it.
It's
And
trying to pr to keep pain from happening. I mean, you're suffering, you're having pain in your life, and you're doing things to mitigate that pain.
yeah,
And that's really what addiction is, right?
yeah, it's what addiction is, but I got to tell you, I mean, that's the biggest hurdle because I talk
Mm.
to first responders a lot. I know you do. Is somebody's on the fence whether or not say they call me up and they're like I'm struggling, and
Mm.
it's just making taking that first step. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing because often they're afraid of what people are gonna say about them. They're going to take away their gun. They're going to
Hmm.
do all this stuff. They're going to have this label on them. And that's the hardest thing. And once
Yeah.
they get down to Florida, where I'm at Shatterproof and FHE Health, then okay, the hard part is taking the step. And now they're in a community where they're
Hmm.
among other first responders who have done
Yeah.
the same thing. And
I've talked to first responders who have gone off to treatment centers, and we had one that I know who went off to California to do 30 days with a treatment center, and it wasn't until they got there and she met other first responders who had her same story. She was like, "Oh, I'm not the only one."
yeah, exactly. And that's what I tell clients and I tell them, look, you are unique, you are special, you are one of a kind. There's nobody else like you.
Hmm.
But your problems and challenges are not that unique.
Hmm.
I know you think that you are the only one that's going through them, but to your point, Conrad, there's so many other first
Yeah,
responders and people for that matter, not just first
yeah,
responders, but people just walking around on the street right now. They're
yeah,
all carrying something, and a lot of it is similar,
yeah.
you know?
And in my research, I often also learned that a lot of first responders get into the business because they had a traumatic childhood. So
Absolutely.
you're looking at those ACEs scores, high. I think the average first responder has a 7 on the ACEs score,
Yeah.
which is crazy. It's the same number that the average incarcerated inmate has, which tells you something.
Yeah.
And so when you experience trauma as a young person, and now you're like, you know what, I want to be a helper. I want to do what I didn't have. And that's what a
Absolutely.
lot of first responders experience. And so so now you're carrying all those traumas from your childhood into this business where you're dealing with people that were like you when you were 6,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
you want to save people
So
now.
you want to save people, right?
The problem is that we're not saving ourselves first.
Yeah, right.
We're trying to save the
Yeah.
world. And that's the one thing I try to, pass on to people I talk to and the clients in the program is that you first have to, I know you're a public servant, and you serve and you have to take care of your community and do all this other stuff, which is important. But if you're not in the right headspace, if you're not good, how effective are you going to be at
Mm-hmm.
going out there? I think 40% is the number I read recently. 40% of first responders that can come, that's under everybody under that umbrella are suffering from addiction, mental health
Hmm.
challenges, in a lot of cases, both. That's the number we know about, Conrad.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
the number is probably much, much, much higher.
Hmm. Yeah, and one thing that I'm trying to do as well with some of my social media channels is to inspire people to do the thing daily that they need to do to get to a healthy spot. For me personally, it's a daily challenge. It's a daily thing. If I don't keep up with myself mentally, spiritually, my health wise, if I don't keep up with that every day, I start slipping.
Yeah,
I start going backwards. And I'm not bringing my best self to my podcast, to my programming that I do, all the things that I do. I want to be able to bring my best self to that. And so I want to
absolutely.
encourage first responders, if you want to thrive at your job, if you want those promotions, and bring your best self. And what that requires is doing the hard things that requires you to work out every day, to be mindful, to be grateful, to do all the things to get you to a healthy spot so that you can bring your best self.
Absolutely. Very well said, sir. And if I could piggyback on that, as somebody in recovery, I went through treatment a while ago, and I just, I'm resigned to the fact, a good fact, that I'm always going to be in recovery. To your
Mm,
point, I always have to work on myself. It's just not, I'm feeling good one day, I'm just going to go ahead and discard everything else, and I can
mhm,
lapse, and I don't have to do this, or I don't have to see my psychiatrist or whatever. I'm
mhm,
feeling good. No, it is
mhm.
a nonstop process. So, to your point, Conrad, I mean, you have to have those, or you should have those routines, those habits that are keeping you on track. It's like building a foundation.
Mhm.
You build that foundation because I tell people too, Conrad, look, nobody's coming to save you. I don't mean
Yeah.
to sound like an ass or anything, and I
Yeah.
put it gently, but the bottom line is nobody's going to fly in here and taking care of all your
Mhm.
problems. And
Yeah.
that's not the role of a therapist or a counselor.
Mhm.
Our role is to empower you and to
Mhm.
provide you with the foundation and the resources so you can do this
Mhm.
yourself.
I even took the step about a month ago to start seeing a therapist myself.
Oh, I think everybody needs a
And
therapist at
it's
some point.
been it's been amazing. I mean, I'm like two or three sessions in now, and so I'm still growing in that, and but I look forward to that because it's a time for me to kind of unload on someone else,
Yeah, and I
for the
think
stuff that I carry.
yeah, and I think some of it is like with me, I'm getting older, and you realize, albeit late for me, that you with certain things you can't do it by yourself. you know,
Absolutely.
you have to, there's yeah, maybe there's a time to be a lone wolf, but when it comes to
Hmm.
challenges and stuff like that, suffering, you need strength, and that comes with community
Yeah,
and talking with people.
absolutely.
And the other thing that I learned, and you know this, Conrad, and some of the listeners might, PTSD, folks, does not just apply to veterans and first responders.
Mm-mm. Mm.
Many people have PTSD that
Yep.
aren't veterans and first responders. So that's
Yep.
kind of like a thing that I just want to throw out there when people talk about PTSD, or a lot of people that I talk to, they automatically go to like combat veterans and first
Hmm.
responders. But really anybody can develop PTSD.
Yeah, and that is absolutely true. And when I first started this project and working on the PTSD 911 film, I didn't realize that first responders suffer from PTSD.
Yeah,
Just as a citizen, as just, Joe Schmo out there doing my thing. Wow, first responders? I didn't think about it. It didn't connect until I started working on this. And that's one reason I made this film to help even the general
absolutely.
public understand that, hey, these are our public servants who are riding the ambulance, who are driving the fire truck, who are responding to, that they're pulling us over, when I'm speeding,
Another ticket.
another ticket, I got PTSD from that, but no, to your point, yeah, there's many people walking around on the streets every day that suffer from PTSD, and it's something that it shouldn't be a stigma.
No.
It's the result of having those traumatic experiences, and and there's healing. There's
Yeah, yeah,
healing for that.
absolutely. And here's another thing I just want to throw out to the listener. It's not a contest either.
Hmm.
It's not, if you're out there suffering and maybe you've watched PTSD 911, and you can relate to that because you're struggling. But I don't have the problems that these first
Mm,
responders have, or my problems aren't as bad. Trauma is
mhm.
trauma, folks.
Yeah.
You know, trauma is trauma. Conrad's trauma is his trauma. Mine is my trauma. It's not trying to one up each other on the trauma scale.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I remember I had to learn that when I first got into treatment, Conrad. I was listening to some of these stories of a bunch of first responders, and some of these stories, I was like, my God, I mean,
Mm,
I'm struggling, but and one of the therapists pulled me inside and said, look, it's not a contest.
mm,
Your trauma
mhm,
is your trauma,
mhm,
you know? And so I think and I hear this a lot now because I work in behavioral health.
mhm,
It's, well, I'm suffering, but there's other people who are suffering more. Well,
mm.
you're suffering.
Yeah, you're suffering.
You're
Yep.
suffering. So you need to pick up the phone and make that call and take that first step. That's the hardest thing.
Yeah, that is always the hardest thing. But you know what? That's even though it's the hardest thing, once you do that,
Oh yeah.
you begin to realize that why didn't I do this, you know, a
Well,
year
I think
ago?
well, and I think a lot of it, and you know this. You've talked to a lot of first responders and made your documentary is that a lot of it is fear, obviously, and a lot of it is
Absolutely.
ego.
Hmm.
And I'll say it. It was for me. It was a lot of it was okay. I got to put my ego aside.
Hmm.
I was a commander when I retired. Well, what are people going to think about me? I got to the point, Conrad. I was like, I don't give a damn what people think of me. This is
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not trying to want to win a popularity contest here.
Hmm.
By
Well, you know,
suppressing my stuff.
there's a guy in my film that's he's a funny guy. He's an older gentleman. He's a detective with an agency, and he talks about this very thing. He said, you know, I haven't cried for 30 years, you know.
Yeah,
I'm a tough guy. I was in the Marines, you know, for crying out loud, you know. I'm a tough guy. I'm a man, you know. And he's like, and then he realized that well, he was pretty broken, you
yeah.
know, and he didn't go into all the details in the film, but he talks about how he was drinking a case of liquor a week, you
Jeez.
know, and it's like, okay, yeah, I have a problem, you know, and
Yeah,
when he said, I suffered for 6 years, he says in the film, he says, I didn't need to suffer for 6 years
yeah.
if I'd have just had the courage to ask for help.
Absolutely. And all those first responders in your documentary, Conrad, maybe some of them realize, hopefully they do, that their story that
Hmm.
they are sharing bravely is probably going to be the playbook for somebody else.
Hmm.
Somebody says, well, look at this guy, look at this female out here, these first responders, they're brave enough to come forward. I'm going to copy them.
Hmm.
I'm going to do what they did, and they put their fear aside, and they're in this film. I'm going to do that because
Yeah.
that's how you break the stigma, I think,
And I
or
can
really
tell you a
chip
story about
away.
that.
Go
I
ahead,
can.
sir.
We were in Mississippi for a screening a couple months ago, earlier this year, and afterward, this fire chief came up to me, a younger guy, and is probably in his 30s or so, early 40s, kind of a bigger guy, folded his arms. I didn't think I had a problem until I saw your movie, you know. And so we had a conversation about that.
Yeah,
And he said, I really saw myself in a lot of those stories, and I didn't really realize it. And now what's happened, he's reached out to another friend of mine, another firefighter retired who started a support group. Now he's working on starting a support group in his community because
yeah.
he sees the need for it. What the film did for him and for his community was start that conversation. Because he told me, he said, we've never talked about this. He said, never, ever have we talked about it. He said, we don't have any peer support. We don't have anything like that. He said, we've had maybe a couple debriefs after a critical incident over the course of my career, he said. But he said, we've never had in-depth conversations about this. And now they're doing that.
Well, and that's what I mean, and that's a great example of breaking the stigma. And to all the brass out there, because I was one of them, the higher echelon, the chief. I'm not saying that they're not important, but what really is more powerful, if you ask me, it's more powerful to have the line staff and the sergeant and the middle management, the ones that are out on the street saying, look, watch Conrad's documentary. And it's more powerful coming from, and again, everybody has a role in an organization. I get
Mm,
that. But when you have the line staff, if you have the old sergeant who's been on the street or the old firefighter who rolls out every time the bell rings, and they're telling their story, the younger troops are going to
mm,
see that,
mm,
and they're going to be like, my God. Because there's, we could talk about stigma with the brass. Well, they don't get it. They're out of touch.
Hmm.
They don't. And I understand that, but there's something to be said for, you and I are patrol officers, Conrad, and I go get help. And, you
Hmm.
see that, you could say, well, if Pat did it, I can do it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's almost like, and for
absolutely.
all the brass out there or the command staff listening to this, I'm not trying to take a dig or swipe at you. I'm just saying that it's powerful when people who are on the street responding are sharing this. That's how you break
Hmm.
the stigma. Because I can
Yeah.
be in meetings all day as a commander and we could talk about stigma and how to break it, but it really starts at the bottom levels, that if you ask me.
And it also takes leadership because I told this
Absolutely.
guy, I told this chief, I said, when you were a young firefighter, you wanted to be the guy on the nozzle. And in the firefighter parlance, that's the first guy in the house, when the house is on fire. They're kicking in the door, they're taking the hose and they're going in. You want to be that guy. He said, yeah, we all want to be that guy, the first one in, on the nozzle. He said, now you as a chief, you're the first one into the wellness space.
Absolutely.
They're going to follow you. If you do this and you talk about this and you bring this up and you go get help, the rest of your team's going to follow you. As long as you
Absolutely.
have the respect, as long as, you're not just some asshole who,
Well, no,
doesn't
I get
respect the
that. And
people.
I think there's some organizations out there that are good with that and other organizations that do this. It's
Yeah.
just lip service and they're
Yeah.
checking a box. We did wellness training this year. And
Yeah.
that's the problem is you have really good leadership in some organizations, then they
Hmm.
suck in other
Yeah.
organizations.
I'm a little worried here in Maryland recently. We had, I think last year, there was a bill passed where all law enforcement now have to do a wellness check once a year.
Hmm.
And I talked to some of the officers who are involved with that. And I even talked to some of the mental health providers who are doing that. And from the officer's perspective, in some cases, they said it's really just to check the box. We get
Yeah.
together with the shrink and we just yap, 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 talk, answer the questions and okay, we're done. We're check the box. Okay, we had our wellness check.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks, but it takes a little more than that.
Absolutely. And we live in an environment, Conrad, you know this, and listeners probably do. Nobody is flocking to the first responder field anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very few people, thank God, there are people, brave men and women who still want to be in law enforcement, firefighters, but the numbers every year are slowly going down. So
Yeah,
what does that say? Yeah, we need to take care of our number one
yeah,
asset, and that's our human
people.
assets.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have to leave. I get that, or they can't do the
Mm-hmm.
job anymore. But if you have a person that's in your organization that's struggling, we need to do everything in our power to get them better.
Yeah, I recently read a study of business in general, companies in general. They said that if your employees feel supported from the management, they will do anything. They will work for you longer. They'll work for less money. And
Exactly.
and I talked to a fire captain down in Texas, in Little Elm, Texas. It's a suburb of Dallas. He went to his city management and said, "Hey, I need a line item in the budget for wellness and mental health for my agency." They said yes. They put a line item in the budget. I said, "How much of the budget is that?" He says, "For like 0.0000001%. I mean, it's just a very small part of the
Hmm.
budget, but it provides a 100% mental health and wellness support for their agency." He said, "We have a line at the door waiting to come work for us."
Yes.
He said, "We have firefighters from larger departments making more money wanting to come work for us because they know they're going to be taken care of."
And that's the thing. A lot of times some people you just throw money at it. Money is important. We all know that. But to your point, I'd rather be in an organization that's looking out for me, has my back, that's going to
Hmm.
take care of me, emotionally, all that stuff. And money's important, but well, to your point, I mean, you have this fire department where people are leaving to make less money, but that's because they
Yeah,
know they're going to get taken care of. And
right.
that's another thing I hear sometimes, Conrad, is this agency betrayal kind of thing, or this
Hmm.
command staff betrayal, where they, the in perception is reality with a lot of these first responders. If they feel like they're flapping in the wind and nobody's listening to them, or well, it's just part of the job, suck it up.
Hmm.
That's a tough spot to be in, man.
Yeah, yeah, that's not fun for anyone,
No.
to be in that spot. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, and my wife's in the education field, and it's kind of that
Yep.
way there.
Yeah.
In the education field, it's a challenge
Yeah.
when you don't have people supporting you.
Yeah. Well, thank God there's people like you out there, Conrad, making these documentaries to really shed light on the problem with PTSD among first responders. And if people want to, how can they find your documentary, brother?
Yeah, well, right now we have it available mostly for first responder agencies to
Yeah.
purchase. So we have it available as a toolkit. So
Yes,
we offer the film plus another whole film called Risk Lock from Jason Harney,
I saw that. Yeah.
and as well as a bunch of other resources that are available for first responders. So they can go to our website at PTSD911movie.com and purchase that. And you can, as soon as you purchase it, you get access to it and all the other resources. We also are available for screening events, and we're hosting these screening events around the country. I'll be out in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks for the EMS World Expo. I'll be in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Virginia, and I'm going all over the country showing the film, and Washington State as well. Hoping to come to Florida sometime where
Yes, you
you
got to
are.
come down here, Conrad.
And so,
Yeah, I would
we
love to.
we don't have it necessarily available for the general public at this point, and part of the reason is that it's not a good film for you to be sitting at home alone on your couch to be watching it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's best to be watching it in a group so that you can have a discussion afterwards. And
Yeah.
so that's how we really offer it. And eventually it'll be on the streamers. Are actually going to be on Maryland Public Television coming in January or February next year. So they have acquired the film, and so really excited about that, getting it out on the networks on PBS. So really excited
Absolutely.
about that. But then we'll probably release it on the streamers more widely. We had it on Amazon for a while, but we pulled it off of that.
Yeah.
Um, but we'll
Well,
make it more widely available for people to get. But I
that's
encourage people to
amazing.
look, keep tabs with us on our Facebook page, on our Instagram, and follow us. I have a podcast now called the First Responder Wellness Podcast. We talk about the film on there a
I
lot, and I
love
bring
it.
on leaders from all over the country. Got some amazing new guests coming up. Season 2 starts here in a little bit,
I
so
love it. I
looking
love
forward
it.
to it.
And for those of you who haven't seen PTSD 911, it is powerful. It is so well made. Kudos to Conrad and his team. But you're right. You gotta watch it with somebody else, to talk
Yeah,
about it afterwards. So,
yeah.
brother, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are, and God bless you. And everything we talked about, folks, is going to be linked up in the show notes, including all the social that Conrad just mentioned. So, thank you so much, brother. And I can't wait for you to come down to Florida, man.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the program, and I look forward to coming to Florida, not only to see you, but I got some family members down there as well that I want to
Yeah.
see, and we want to bring the film. We want to have
Yes.
some events in Florida, so looking forward to that.
God bless, brother. Thank you.